great to be back here. And it's actually a great privilege to be with a great friend and former colleague at Microsoft Research, Tom Lawry. Yeah, without any further ado, Tom, I would like to give you the opportunity to introduce yourself and talk a little bit about your background before we get into the Q&A.
Well, thanks, Benny. It's great to see you. It's been a while. So I'm Tom Lawry. I'm currently the National Director for Artificial Intelligence for Health and Life Science at Microsoft. Been at Microsoft almost a decade. And matter of fact, way back when, that's when I met Benny many years ago, as we were both working in an incubation group for healthcare. So I've always spent my career in healthcare, spent a lot of time in the software technology side, but actually started my career running hospitals and health systems in the United States for about 12 years. So healthcare is such a great cause. It's a noble cause. And you know, there are a lot of things that allow us room for improvement to make it even better, which is why I get excited when we look at the use of technology to be put in the hands of clinicians and others to take us from where we are to a better level.
That's a great context, Tom. And one of the things that I think, as you said, we were about a decade ago incubating some cloud technologies in healthcare, and a lot has happened since then. I think one of the interesting things that we are in very interesting and unusual times with the pandemic now. And one of the things that it becomes, I guess, more and more obvious is the power and the need that we all have for data-driven solutions, for artificial intelligence solutions, and we talked about lots of different aspects of that. So I know you also just recently published a book. I'm still waiting for my autographed copy of AI in healthcare. And I wonder if you could give us some thoughts in terms of your experience of over a decade in the AI space, in the healthcare space. What are you seeing today in the use of those kinds of solutions?
Yeah, well, first of all, thanks for the shout out on the book. Yes, I have a new book from HIMSS and CRC Press, AI in Health, a leader's guide to winning in the new age of intelligent health. So essentially, I wrote the book because we're seeing a tremendous move towards the use of the cloud with the use of artificial intelligence and applying those things to the goals we've always pursued in healthcare, which is improving quality, improving efficiencies. It's interesting you would mention the COVID situation because many organizations around the world are very excited about the application of AI to health. COVID's rise in the pandemic just in the last few months really created an interesting situation where literally at the early stages of the pandemic, what we saw were talented clinicians and data scientists using AI to actually help manage the COVID situation. So a couple of quick examples using AI. Early on, a lot of the researchers realized that there are data and research studies and articles out there around the family of COVID viruses, but they were all spread throughout the world. So Microsoft teamed up with other groups such as the National Institute for Health, the National Library of Medicine here in the United States, and essentially used a knowledge extraction tool to bring together 29,000 articles and research studies to make them immediately searchable that allowed researchers and others to get a head start on what was happening with just understanding the pandemic. Another favorite of mine was the use of a bot. I mean, there are a number of bots out there, including one from Microsoft, that are health grade bots. When we saw what was happening, we took our health bot and spun it into a coronavirus bot, put it out there for free use. We had groups like here, again, in the United States, the Centers for Disease Control and hospitals and healthcare organizations around the world adopting this bot to field literally millions of incoming inquiries from consumers and others concerned about symptoms, concerned about what to do. So you can only imagine, literally it handled millions of requests that had that been left to humans, it either would have required a lot of humans or frankly, a lot of those calls would have gone unanswered. So just a few things that show when there's a need, AI can be spun up on an agile basis to do good.
Yeah, I fully agree, Tom, and interesting you gave these examples of the bots. It's just brought back to my mind a recent thing, I spoke at a different venue here about how Israel responded to the COVID-19 with some of the assets in technology and even in the military that we have here. And one of the things that really surprised me when we talk about innovation and agility and all that was that, in general, I think the brand that military organizations have is not of the nimble organizations, but we actually saw here entire departments of R&D that served for repairing tanks or real military capacities in a matter of days, not even weeks. They pretty much repurposed all their resources to adapt a robot that was used for dismantling bombs in terrorist attacks to actually going and performing some activities where you didn't know if a health professional could get contaminated, infected by the virus. So I think a very interesting analysis with what you said. It's a different context, but in any case, I wanted to deep dive a little bit on what you said. In our journey through the cloud, we came up with very different taxonomies and very different use case scenarios. But today we talk a lot about intelligent health systems, right? And again, intelligent is a kind of a subjective term. I wonder if you could elaborate a little bit on, what's really different between the traditional way in which health and medical organizations typically provide services and what's the so-called new intelligent way of doing that.
Yeah. Well, what we're seeing is as the use of AI becomes more pervasive in healthcare, there are some organizations that are moving faster to not only embrace and adopt it, but look at how it's not just the application of technology, but it truly allows you to rethink the way everything is done from clinical workflow to operational workflow. So what we're seeing is organizations that in my book I describe as intelligent health systems. So the question is, what does that look like or what does that mean? There are many organizations that are experimenting with artificial intelligence. Perhaps they've spun up a pilot or two that are actually in use today. An intelligent health system is really an organization that embraces intelligent and smart technologies, and they do so in a way where they look at all systems and how to apply artificial intelligence strategically to create strategic advantage. And that's really done by creating greater operational efficiencies. And rather than doing it in one or two instances, they're looking at how to apply it across all touch points, all experiences, and all channels that a health consumer or patient would have. Additionally, when we talk about that, it's not just changing the experience for the consumer, it's actually looking at how to redefine work processes to further empower employees, clinicians, doctors to be better at what they do. So it's that pervasive use applied strategically against your mission and goals. And, I'd quickly say it's driven by two things. One, when you look at healthcare today, anyone in healthcare knows, I don't need to tell you this, but medical capabilities are expanding almost exponentially, which is a good thing. At the same time, we've got economic constraints. We've got staff shortages. The way we ask our clinicians to work is producing almost at epidemic proportions this thing of physician and nurse burnout. And so those are all the factors that we can help make better. And then at the same time, think about the rise of the intelligent consumer. Think about anyone listening, what you do with your smartphone, your smart applications. Think about your use of Netflix or Uber or any of those things that make your life easier in managing. So when you have a healthcare need as a consumer, you expect those same experiences to be had in healthcare. So we have the rise of the intelligent consumer. We have changes in demographics, such as here in the United States, what we call millennials. They're the second largest group of insured consumers. Only 6% of millennials have a designated primary care physician. So the way it works here in America, if you want to see a specialist, guess what? We say, well, go to your primary care physician and get a referral. Well, if you don't have one, how does that work? And our ability to take the technology, match it to the way that consumers want to have an experience is really what intelligent health systems are all about.
Absolutely. Thank you for sharing, Tom. And I deeply appreciate that also on a personal level. Now, my father is now retired in Brazil. He's a physician who's pursued a long career in managing large hospitals. And having his private clinic, and we can just see that the pace that we live in today, the demographics, and all the changes that we see just make it harder and harder for physicians to also keep up with the expectations that we all have. And on that note, I wanted to actually touch a subject here that I find it quite interesting, and I would love to hear your perspectives, which is many times I speak about AI in conferences. I was recently in an AI forum in Moscow right before the COVID hit really strong. And we talked about AI in different verticals. I spoke about health, other people talked about retails, etc. And a very common comment across all those industries is AI going to replace humans? So people gave an example recently where there was a mention in the press that MSN was laying off some editors because they were kind of collecting information and formatting them, whatever. As well, a bot could do that. And so I wanted to, I think obviously we are not going to get rid of physicians. We actually need to help them, and we would definitely need them, and we actually need more than them. But I wondered if you could speak a little bit about how you see, the new world for the physicians when we really embrace these AI solutions.
Well, great question, and so the answer to will AI replace humans anytime soon? The answer is, to me, no. When you think about AI, there are really only two ways that artificial intelligence will drive value in healthcare today. It will either automate processes or it will augment processes done by knowledge workers. So when we think about the first, automation means something done by a human today will be done by a smart machine in the future. Typically, the things that can be automated are typically lower value, highly repetitive activities. So, think about things like perhaps an admitting clerk, or something to do with registration, something to do with maybe some accounting functions. And the reality is there will be some jobs that will be automated out of existence. But most of healthcare is really driven by knowledge workers. Again, think physicians, nurses, think about all those smart people in the finance department or in HR. And really, the value proposition of artificial intelligence it comes in augmenting what they do to help them be better. So it's putting tools in the hands of knowledge workers. And then I'd finally just point out that, a lot of people don't understand the value that AI brings beyond that, where when you think about the care process, there are a lot of things artificial intelligence is really good at, such as pattern recognition. So it may be that use of AI for radiology allows a radiologist to spot something they might not have seen, or they won't have the time to go out and look for it. So it's good at that. But when you think about the care process, it involves things like judgment, wisdom, empathy, creativity, problem-solving skills, for which no one has figured out how to have a computer do those things. And I always like to quip where we always talk about artificial intelligence, but have you ever heard anyone talk about artificial wisdom? And so it really is that juxtaposition of what do we do to get the best out of artificial intelligence, put it in the hands of these talented clinicians that have all of those things that are uniquely human. That's where we're going to get the best of the humans and the best of the technology applied against our mission and goals in healthcare.
Yep. Fully agree. On that note, Tom, I think both you and I have been on this journey for a while. On one hand, I think I've seen a tremendous amount of progress. When I left Microsoft Research, we actually took out Microsoft Azure from research. It was a little project called named Red Dog. I'm sure you remember that. And now it's looking 10 years later, what a beautiful business it became. And not only Microsoft, but Google and Amazon and Alibaba and so many other companies are doing some great things around the cloud. That said, one of the pushbacks I get every time I do a keynote or something around AI is that no matter the glass is always half full and half empty. And although we've seen great applications of AI in many different industries, and I've lived many of them, the general numbers in terms of the adoption and versus the potential that corporations and organizations in general have to adopt AI, it's still kind of a bit behind what one would expect. Of course, expectations depend on who that is, but I think there's still room to improve. I wonder if you could share your perspectives in terms of people, organization, process, regulations. I mean, what are the main blockers you still see, and what are some things that that you think could be done to accelerate that pace?
Well, there were actually like 5 questions in that one, Benny. But so when it comes to healthcare and the adoption of AI, it's probably not the fastest compared to other industries such as manufacturing, finance, retail. But it's coming up, and so we're early in the journey, and so typically the use cases when markets are young are different than, say, if we're having a conversation 2 years from now in healthcare. And that's where I think there are many organizations that are kind of looking at it. One of the key points I like to make, and I make in my book, is that there are many people in healthcare that somehow believe AI is part of the future. And my big push is, no, it's really part of the present and what you're doing today. And I think going back to just what's happened in the last several months with COVID, it demonstrates that in the hands of talented clinicians and data scientists, we can do good on a measurable basis at scale. And so some of it's what I call the leadership mindset of, there are some leaders that are well-trained, great experience, and it's almost like that locks them into place for the traditional ways in which healthcare is provided. I think that the leader of the future is going to be much more agile in terms of being open to change, really understanding not just the technology, but more importantly, things like process change. Things like involving clinicians from the beginning. We often see organizations moving with an AI initiative, treating it like it's a technology-only initiative. Back to what I said earlier, where if value comes from automating and augmenting work processes, it has a huge impact on every clinician, every employee of a health system today. So having that when AI meets HR conversation today is critically important when it comes to not only getting AI to be pervasive and valuable, but also living up to the commitments people often talk about when it comes to commitments to their clinicians and their workforce for bringing them along as well. So it's happening. It's probably going a little more slowly than either one of us would like to see, but it is happening. And then there are the select few organizations that are really starting to fit into that definition of intelligent health systems where they get it. They're using it to really create strategic advantage by creating efficiencies and doing it across all of those channels and touch points, which I believe consumers and others are going to respond very favorably to.
Fair enough, Tom. And again, that brings to another point, which is at the end of the day, we're talking about future of health, and we are talking about innovation. Sometimes it's incremental innovation, sometimes it's very disruptive, and it's obviously a very, very critical and sensitive space, right? We're dealing with people's lives. So I wonder if you could share, what clinical and health leaders need to know about their own organizations or about their environment so that they can actually move towards this future that we're all envisioning and really use, deploy, get the most value out of AI systems in this emerging model of intelligent health.
Well, it's interesting to me, and I mean no disrespect to any leader in healthcare today. It's a big job and it's a tough job. But and like you, I have the privilege of speaking both virtually and pre-COVID. Flying around to do a lot of sessions with places, things like Arab Health, which was my last actual real face-to-face, where I did a keynote with 100 of the top leaders in the Middle East on the value of AI. And what I find is everyone has aspiration and a vision. But the vision is almost the easy part. It's all about that execution, which goes to your question. So again, I think a lot of this is what I call the leadership imperative that I write about in the book and what that actually looks like. It's also things like curating a data-driven culture, which back to our people, looking at things like it's interesting. There's a lot being talked about and written now on creating a modern data estate. And basically, a modern data estate is all the data you own, have access to, whether you own it, control it, or whether you're just tapping into someone else's data, but it's that collective of data that currently in most parts of the world, we have massive amounts of data, and many of those data sets are stored in what I call dark pools of data. They're not connected, they're hard to get to, which creates a real barrier for talented clinicians and others who want to use that to do better. So things as simple as creating a modern data estate. And many times there's a new catchphrase in healthcare that goes around that basically says, data is the new currency in healthcare, which I love the statement. And when I hear a leader say that, my question then is always, well, if data is the new currency, are you managing your data the same way as you're managing your finances? And usually there's a pause and then a chuckle, and the answer is, well, no. But it starts with the fundamentals where, again, I've gone around the world giving keynotes on artificial intelligence. I've never had anyone ask me to do a keynote on a modern data estate, which is the fundamental, it's like table stakes to really be looking at the focus on HR. So it's things like data estates, bringing your clinicians along in a way where their hands are on the steering wheel, helping define the future state, not only in terms of workflow change, but how that affects your workforce and what you need to do to help them prepare for that future.
Yeah, I'm so glad you mentioned that. I moved here to the Middle East about 5 years ago, and here we say data is the new oil. So that's the currency for the.
Well, it's funny, when I was in Dubai in February, yeah, it was it was oil, and that was fun to play with when it comes to, well, if data is the new oil in the Middle East, are you managing your data the same way you manage oil as an asset? And
Yeah,
it's the same dialogue. Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, but on a serious note, I do think that one of the things in the past edition of this series, we talked to many entrepreneurs and many corporate executives, and there was a long debate about where the innovation comes from, and I personally think it comes from all those sides. Corporations have their limitations, but have a lot of power. I see amazing things coming out of Microsoft research and IBM research. At the same time, we do realize that many entrepreneurs came out of big organizations and decided to spin off. We had some of those experiences and do their own thing, and I think they both coexist. But my question to you is more on the where this is all going, and I'll give you like my personal experience. When I left Microsoft the second time, I was running a digital transformation sales team here in Middle East and Africa. Got to work in very large organizations and drive some large projects on cloud and AI. And then the past year, I've been dedicating myself to the entrepreneurial ecosystem and mainly startups and VCs. And one of the benefits I have is I just came out of a meeting with an entrepreneur that's doing what we call AI for AI. So we talked to him last week. I actually advise his company now. Mm-hmm. And the concept is relatively simple, although hard to explain, which is like everything in life, AI, basically, if you really simplify it, it's a way to optimize particular processes or tasks, right? And but that process itself, as we know, is full of biases and flaws and problems, and even a great model that runs today perfectly might not be running so well in a couple of weeks or months or years, given changes. So AI for AI is kind of how do you evolve AI, and it's a very interesting concept that I've been working on. I wonder what do you think in terms of the future of AI in health? What are some trends? What are some things that you think will keep changing and evolving, or still are to be seen?
Well, as we've already discussed, while we're in the early stages, we're already seeing a great movement. We're already seeing very hard numbers on return on investment or return on value when people apply AI in a way that drives value at scale, which is really what it's all about. It's not about pilots and science experiments. It's about taking the mission of a health system to say, how do you make this better in service of the people you serve, empowering the clinicians who are passionate about what they do and being better. Along the way, and again, the use cases I think are going to be very different, much deeper in value, even in a couple years. At the same time, while it may not be going as fast as we'd like, the technology per se, particularly applied to health, is actually often ahead of things like legal and regulatory guidelines in many countries. So I look at, if you look at the beginning of the internet in the 1990s, well, it wasn't the beginning, it was when when consumers discovered it and a browser was created. But, there was a time where there was no such thing as a security or privacy attorney or that practice of law. And we're seeing some of the same things today where there are many things where AI is getting out ahead of legal regulatory principles. And, the regulators and the legislators will always catch up, but there are things that, we're having to pay attention to where, for example, you can do something and have it be secure and compliant per whatever regulations, EU, GDPR here in America, other regulations, but they can be secure and compliant, they can be legal, but do they really fit the standard for your mission and your values? And that's things like, looking at how we deploy AI to safeguard against bias. So if I can do something, say, predict which inpatient is going to have an adverse event that puts them in ICU, and actually do that proactively and somehow prevent 60% of those adverse reactions from happening, it's a quality win, better use of resources. But that 60% is a statistical average. If I told you that, that average really meant my ability to predict and prevent adverse events was 3 times better in white males versus Hispanic females, still legal, it's still compliant, it's still producing value, but would that be okay? It's an example of, how do we stress test and safeguard against bias? Other issues such as transparency, or you mentioned something earlier where there's something known as a continuous learning algorithm that will continue to get smarter. And, what do we need to do to make sure we can stop and replay that tape to say, what's it doing now versus what it was doing when I implemented it 3 months ago? And so there are some things we're working on. It's incumbent upon health leaders and clinicians to really understand some of those issues. And again, eventually the regulators and legislators are going to catch up. But for now, it's all new enough where everyone needs to be mindful of the upside and then basically deploying AI in a way that's responsible and fits the ethics and principles that you as an individual or your organization will want to live up to.
Yeah, that's an outstanding comment, and frankly, one of my favorite topics around AI. The whole matters around ethics. We had similar discussions here with the co-founder of Mobileye, which is now part of Intel. The whole discussion about autonomous cars and episodes like that. As you know, if a car will either run over a child that's crossing the street or cause an accident that could kill the car, what decision should be made? And I think people kind of avoid those discussions because in real life, if you go to trial, you can kind of tell your story. But when you're programming a computer system to do that, you're deliberately making that decision. And I personally think that there's a merit to that because you have to deal with difficult discussions and difficult decisions. And as you say, there are a lot of social and political and regulatory pressures in terms of is it the right thing to do or not? And I think society as a whole needs to agree with that, regardless of whether they're going to automate it or not. And that will force that discussion to happen. So
absolutely,
appreciate your comment there. I as you know, I have enough topics for our discussion for the next 6 weeks, but we have to wrap at some point. So I wonder, I have still many other areas to cover, but I think you did a great job just summarizing. I wonder if you have any specific closing remarks or additional things you'd like to mention that we didn't cover here in terms of the future of AI in health.
Well, Benny, I want to thank you again just for bringing me online with you today. I think it's more of a summary of what we've discussed. AI is not about the future. It's about the present, what we're doing today. If you're a clinician, if you're a health leader, if you're anywhere in health, it really is about how does the use and application of AI impact you going forward with whatever you do. And finally, it's always interesting to me where there are many very talented, smart people in healthcare that somehow when you bring up the topic of AI, they automatically assume that, well, you have to be a technologist and you have to be a data scientist. And, the most important thing in driving value is not the technology, but having experts in whatever you do look at, okay, if I understand the power of what it can do, how do I apply that to solve for some of the biggest problems that are my current challenges? That's where value comes. And I always push and encourage everyone to not buy into that, well, I don't know anything about AI, or gosh, I was never good at whatever. It's all about what you are good at, understanding the power of AI and how you can apply that to be better at what you do. So that's probably the best message I can leave you with.
Thank you so much, Tom. I really, really appreciate it. I can't wait to read the book and to get together with you for a more in-depth catch-up. Thank you so much for taking the time to speak with us. I know you've got a pretty hectic schedule at Microsoft, and at least you don't have that much travel time right now, I assume.
Well, right now we're spending a lot of time online, aren't we?
Yeah, but Microsoft Teams is here for us. Yeah, so that's great. Again, thank you so much, Tom. It was a great pleasure having you here, and I really hope you can join us in a future virtual conference, or hopefully in our physical event in Bratislava in October.
I'd welcome the opportunity, Benny. Thanks so much.
Thank you, Tom.